Yes, there's no doubt. March is going to be intense. There are a number of astrological cycles that are affecting everyone, literally. But, of course, most specifically, we can start with the orange degenerate president and his cratering approval numbers. He is now historically unpopular at a level even worse than the previously historical unpopular president, which was he himself in his first term. And this is because he is trying to implement a recklessly autocratic agenda, and he is therefore feeling the effects. And this is not made up. It's based on credible polls and on the news that even voters in deep red states are becoming quite angry at what is happening, because he seems to be focused on everything except what is relevant to them. Now, this is connected in his chart already prior to March through the fact that the Saturn cycle is now connected to his moon position by way of a square, and it'll make its way to squaring the sun during March. And this is, of course, very difficult. It's difficult for anyone experiencing this kind of transit. It's just that in his case, it's reflecting his situation and it's reflecting the effect of his own actions. And this is not going to let up until at least the first week of April. And if you ask, does that mean it gets better after that? Yes, it does, at least from the point of view of the fact that Jupiter is in his sun sign and it will cross through his sun position. The opposition to the moon from Gemini isn't as good, but the conjunction to the sun definitely is. And you have to keep in mind that he was really in a struggle last year up to the point when Jupiter entered his sign, after which things improved, including the fact that he was able to get himself reelected. But nevertheless, the Saturn cycles are still there, and perhaps if Jupiter were a little closer to his sun degrees, it would ameliorate the effect at the moment. I'm not quite sure, because I've noticed in my focus on Saturn and Jupiter, if both are around and Saturn is too strong, it still feels really uncomfortable. But nevertheless, either way, this is what he's in. Note also that Musk is experiencing the same effect because of his own Saturn square, and both their numbers have cratered significantly. And even though there will be points later in the year when they will be doing better, there are also points after that when they're not. So this becomes a game of patience and sticking it out. And I realize that it's uncomfortable. I certainly don't like it. It's incredibly unnerving to see a president take the side of Russia, and pretend that Ukraine was responsible for the start of that conflict. I mean, it's just totally wackadoodle. And the most disappointing part is that so many million Americans back this kind of nonsense and this kind of awful criminality. But we have to stick it out. We don't have any choice. And the fact that the judiciary is definitely holding him back. I see stories where apparently his lawyers are getting quite frustrated because of the number of things he's trying that are getting rejected, and it's because they're either illegal or downright criminal. That's why they're pushing back. I would say that the odds are pretty good that this will continue, at least in some measure, because the thing about his chart is that in the near term, it's the pressure to his sun and moon, which of course is intense and difficult. And by the way, everything I've said so far is related to what is happening at the White House, what is happening to his initiatives, his popularity, etc. Where the Saturn is can be far more dangerous than that. That house connects the planet to themes such as injuries, surgeries, and all the way to a terminal event. So it's extremely dangerous, and I would say he would be lucky if all that happens to him is that his popularity is damaged. And if you look at the history of presidential popularity, nearly all presidents, after a few months, start to run into problems. For example, Biden in 2021, concurrent with the exit from Afghanistan, which would almost always be a difficult event, although an astrologer would have said to him, don't do it then because Saturn is forming a square. It's the very same thing that Obama stepped into, back in the I think it was the 2013 period or 2012, somewhere in there. Saturn was squaring his sun, and he started the ACA online system, and of course, predictably, it crashed until Saturn moved forward. So, bottom line, he's in it. March is going to be super intense in terms of difficulty for him. The other thing is, when you're looking at the overall transits, right now, we're on the Mars station. Mars is going direct. It's been retrograde since early December. And so a lot of things that have been held back will now start rolling again, going forward. This would be true, for example, speaking now more personal terms, if you've been waiting to make a move on your business or take action on something, and particularly if you feel like it's been stuck for some time, namely about 3 months, now it starts to switch and go the other way. And so that's one major astrological switch. But Saturn stationing, or pardon me, Mars stationing, is generally not all that comfortable. Mars is a difficult planet. So overall, I can't equate it to a positive public mood. And even less so when you see that in a few days, right at the beginning of March, Venus will go into its retrograde station. And this is something that correlates with public rebellion, because Venus, among many things that it rules, connects to the social consensus on what people agree is the right thing to do, our values, what we should be doing. And given that the orange degenerate is determined to do it completely backward, it's natural that there's going to be a rebellion against that. An example of this type of Venus retrograde effect was 2020 during the George Floyd scandal, and people hitting the streets and getting very agitated. So expect that as well, and expect it in March, because that's when Venus is retrograde. It is retrograde into early April, but it certainly encompasses March. And beyond that, we know that, yes, Trump is going to have better days, well, provided he avoids the most difficult part of that eighth sign that I described earlier, of course. He does have better days by way of the Jupiter cycle, which comes up later in the spring. But then, of course, as the year continues, he experiences other difficult times, including, if you're wondering, okay, well, this is what's happening now. Can this guy get away? Will things improve as time is passing? I say no, and the reason I say no is because this is the energy in late Pisces, and because he has planets in relatively late Sagittarius Gemini, he gets the square, which is difficult. Then Saturn and Neptune eventually make their way into Aries. The problem is that when they make their way into Aries, they move into a zone that triggers that T-square in his chart, that infamous Access Hollywood T-square. That's what I had called it back in 2016, because it was triggered during the scandal around that tape, where he was grabbing them by the pee and all that. So I noticed in subsequent months from that point and years is that when planets go through there, he doesn't like it. And a great example was 2022. In the summer of 2022, Jupiter, of all planets, and Jupiter is often the great benefactor. Indeed, it has been for him, no question. But Jupiter then was in that spot where it was triggering that T-square, and so that led to the raid at Mar-a-Lago. Well, that's what he called it, but it was basically the FBI and the government at the time recovering records that he shouldn't have had there. But when you think about it, if that's what Jupiter does, what is Saturn going to do when it goes through there? And to clarify what there means, it's in the 9th sign of his chart. That's where Jupiter was in 22 when he experienced a legal setback. And so now, in the situation that he's in, the legal setback, the legal problems are likely to show up through the judiciary, through the fact that he is trying to basically ignore the law, and the law restricts and restrains him. So in that sense, the Saturn becomes a big problem well beyond its pressure in the late stages of Pisces, which is definitely exerting now, but we can look ahead to future problems in his chart, no doubt about it. And so, bottom line, let's hang in there and let's get through March. And of course, on a personal level, I always counsel everyone to remain calm. This is a period when, if you're ever going to learn more about your inner world through whether it's conventional meditation, some other form of meditation you learn, anything you can do to turn yourself toward some form of harmony, calm, conscious relaxation would be very, very useful, both from the perspective of feeling better and making better decisions.